Well, good morning to all of you, and welcome to Lipscomb University. I want to especially welcome those who share our world of education, those from our school district, but also those from Tennessee State and Volunteer State, those from Meharry, those from the Board of Regents, and those from our neighbors down the street, Belmont. Thank you for coming and participating as another educational institution in the conversation that is about to occur. I went back early this morning, about 5:30 this morning, and looked at the brochure that we published after our first gathering. That was about 3 years ago now, and we put some pictures and a speech that I gave into a little brochure along with an agenda for the future. And as we did that, we began what has become a journey of conversation. A journey of conversation that, as Linda said, began with that political moment in Nashville where I think people, without being as wise as they could be, were suggesting ways for us not to get along. And it was a wonderful moment when, a surprising moment to many of you, but a wonderful moment when Bob Fisher and Randy Lowry actually agreed on something. And not only agreed on something, but found themselves very able to walk forward into the community and seek to lead. People sometimes imagine a competition at levels that are even greater than it might be during the Battle of the Boulevard. But as we look at the community together, it was not hard at all for us to join and think about what we might do. And, of course, so many of you joined us in thinking what we might do in that moment. A year ago, we focused on education and thought about how significant that would be. And education really is the place where it comes together. It's the place where students and families and parents meet. It's the place where there are both legal possibilities and legal constraints. It's the place where passions are inflamed and fears become tangible. It's the place where people's attitudes are formed, and it is the place where our future can be created in a much more profound way. As I was reading through the brochure, I noticed a couple of things. I noticed that there are some pictures in there, and the only two people who have not aged are Candace McQueen and Renata Soto. They look wonderful in those pictures. The rest of us show the years a little bit more. I also looked through that brochure and found the questions I asked back then, questions that I think are still completely relevant to us as we frame today's conversation and those in the future. And so let me, as I just begin this, share with you once again those three questions, and then we'll move into some wonderful presentations, some great conversation, and I'll have the privilege at the end to conclude our time together. The first question I ask is, are we going to live lives clustered in separate communities, or are we going to open the doors and live lives of connectedness? That's still a question for Nashville to answer. It's still a question for the people of this community to answer. It's still an agenda before us. Are we going to live lives that are separate, clustered in separate communities, or are we going to live lives that reflect the connectedness that can be so rich to us? The second question I ask is, are we going to expend our limited resources in time and money and energy on the issues that confront us? Or are we going to focus our resources on opening the doors to the interests that drive us? And we spent a little bit of time, and I won't do it this morning, but thinking about how issues can be so divisive so quickly, but below them are those things that drive us and motivate us, and in many cases we have those very, very much in common. The parents of a Hispanic student living near Nolensville probably is not very different in terms of their motivation and their desires and their vision for their children as parents who are living in North Nashville or parents who are living in Williamson County. There is something that is common at that level, and the question is, will we work at that level? And finally, I ask the question, are we going to focus on the politics of diversity, looking for solutions from government and law? And I am a lawyer, so I have a tendency to like our profession. But I contrasted that by saying, or are we going to open the doors to focus on people? People are both the problem, but people are potentially also the solution. And so we frame our time with questions, not all of which have been answered in this period of time. We come in a particular moment in the history of this conversation and our community, and we seek to, through understanding in panels and keynote presentations and conversation, seek to have an understanding that is greater. I was reflecting this morning on a speech that I gave when I was probably 16 or 17 years old. I was in speech and debate in high school, and I remember the Friday night after I worked until 9 o'clock, I went to my speech coach's house, and we're trying to get ready for a speech the next morning. The way it worked, my speech coach, who was a tough German woman, married to also a university speech professor, she would find a flaw in my speech and send Dr. Backus back to the back room to find an illustration that might work. And he would disappear for who knows how long and eventually come back with a little card out of a card catalog that later I inherited. Hundreds of thousands of speech illustrations. He would come back and he'd say, "Gertrude." Yeah, that was her name. "Gertrude, I think I found something that might fit." And so we would work during the rest of the evening on that. And I remember during one speech he left and came back, and he came back with an illustration from the Constitutional Convention. Now, I'm not a historian, don't know much about that. It was a long time ago, but the illustration has stuck with me. Apparently on the back of Benjamin Franklin's chair, there was a carving, and essentially the carving was the sun, and it was half of the sun. And he would talk during the convention about how he would go back to his chair, and at times he felt very strongly the sun was actually setting. He could only see half of it, didn't know which way it was going, didn't know what the artist might have envisioned, but there was the chair and this reminder. And at times he would be discouraged, at times he would be distraught, and quite sure that the entire idea of this new nation was actually setting before it emerged. And then other times he would go back and something good had happened, and he saw the very same carving, the very same sun, and it was that sun that he believed was rising. Indeed, with his work and the work of so many others, a great nation was created. Well, if we had the chair today, we probably could look at the sun in both of those ways. Since we started the conversation 3 years ago, there certainly are moments that you would have said, boy, it's setting. This is not turning out. We are not making the progress we should. And yet there are other moments as you gather this morning and as we encourage each other and as we hear a wonderful speaker, where I hope we are encouraged and we see the sun rising and we see the confirmation for our passion and our efforts. May you have a wonderful morning. I'll be here all morning with you, and I'll be back to see if I can tie all of this up in just 2 hours. Welcome once again to this conversation.